It's funny how we often talk about red flags in romantic relationships, but we rarely pause to consider the red flags that can arise in friendships, especially among women. We're conditioned to think that friendships are supposed to be easy, nurturing, and supportive, but the truth is, they can be just as complicated, if not more so, than romantic entanglements. I've learned this the hard way through a series of friendships that seemed perfect on the surface, but were riddled with underlying issues that I ignored until they became impossible to overlook. I remember my first real friend in high school. We were inseparable, or at least I thought we were. She was charming, funny, and always the life of the party. I admired her confidence and the way she could light up a room. But looking back, there were signs that I brushed aside. She had this way of making everything about her. I'd share something exciting that happened to me, and she'd pivot the conversation back to her own experiences, her own stories. It was subtle at first, but over time, I began to feel like my voice was being drowned out. I was there to support her, to cheer her on, but when it came to my own achievements, they were met with indifference or a quick change of subject. Then there were the moments of jealousy. I remember vividly when I got a part in the school play. I was ecstatic, but her reaction was lukewarm at best. Instead of celebrating with me, she made a snide comment about how she could have easily gotten the role if she had tried out. It was a small thing, but it lingered in my mind. I brushed it off, thinking it was just her way of expressing her own insecurities. But as time went on, I started to notice a pattern. Whenever I succeeded, she would find a way to downplay it or shift the focus back to herself. It was exhausting, and yet I clung to the friendship, convinced that I was being overly sensitive. Then there was the gossip. Oh, the gossip. I can't tell you how many times I found myself in the middle of conversations where she would tear down other girls in our circle. It was always cloaked in concern, of course. "I just don't understand why she acts that way," she'd say, rolling her eyes. I mean, who does she think she is? I should have recognized that this was a red flag, a sign that if she could talk about others like that, she could just as easily talk about me when I wasn't around. But I was young and naive, and I convinced myself that it was just harmless chatter, a way to bond over shared frustrations. Fast forward a few years, and I found myself in a new friendship with a woman who seemed to embody everything I had been missing. She was kind, empathetic, and genuinely interested in my life. For the first time, I felt seen and heard. But as I let my guard down, I began to notice the subtle signs of manipulation. She had this way of making me feel guilty for not spending enough time with her. "I just miss you so much," she'd say, her voice dripping with sincerity. But it was more than that. It was a tactic. I started to feel like I had to choose between my other friends and her, as if my loyalty was being tested. And then there were the passive-aggressive comments. "Oh, I guess you're too busy for me now," she'd say when I couldn't make it to an event. It was always wrapped in a layer of sweetness, but the sting was undeniable. I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to gauge her mood and adjust my behavior accordingly. I wanted to be a good friend, but I also wanted to maintain my own life, my own interests. It was a delicate balance, and I found myself losing sight of what I wanted in the process. I started to realize that friendships could be just as toxic as romantic relationships. The emotional labor was heavy, and I was exhausted. I began to question whether I was the problem. Was I too sensitive? Too demanding? I sought advice from other friends, and while some were supportive, others dismissed my concerns, telling me that friendships are complicated and that I should just try to work things out. But I knew deep down that I was dealing with red flags that I couldn't ignore any longer. It was during this time that I stumbled upon the concept of emotional intelligence. I started to educate myself on healthy relationships, boundaries, and the importance of mutual respect. I learned that it's okay to prioritize my own needs and that a true friendship should uplift and empower both parties. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I began to reevaluate my friendships and the dynamics at play. I took a step back from the friendship that had become so draining. I started to set boundaries, to say no when I needed to. It was liberating, but it also came with its own set of challenges. I faced backlash, accusations of being selfish, and even attempts to guilt trip me into compliance. But I stood firm. I realized that I deserved friendships that were reciprocal, where both parties felt valued and appreciated. As I navigated this process, I began to recognize the red flags in other friendships as well. There was the friend who always seemed to need something from me, but never offered support in return. The one who would only reach out when she was going through a tough time, but would vanish when things were good. The one who would make plans but cancel at the last minute, leaving me feeling unimportant and discarded. Each interaction became a lesson, a reminder of what I wanted and what I wouldn't tolerate. I learned to trust my instincts. If something felt off, it probably was. I started to surround myself with women who celebrated my successes, who listened without judgment, and who were genuinely happy for me. I found a community of women who uplifted each other, who shared their struggles and triumphs without competition or jealousy. It was a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the toxic dynamics I had experienced before. Now I approach new friendships with a discerning eye. I look for signs of mutual respect, empathy, and support. I pay attention to how they treat others, how they react to my successes, and whether they genuinely care about my well-being. I've learned that it's okay to walk away from friendships that don't serve me, that don't align with my values. It's a process, and it's not always easy, but it's necessary for my own mental health and happiness. In the end, recognizing red flags in female relationships has been a journey of self-discovery. It's taught me about my own worth, the importance of boundaries, and the value of surrounding myself with people who lift me up rather than tear me down. Friendships should be a source of joy, not a source of stress. And while I may have stumbled along the way, I'm grateful for the lessons learned and the strength I've gained. I'm ready to embrace the friendships that truly enrich my life, and I won't settle for anything less.